distinguished delegates, dear colleagues. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Distinguished delegates, for this morning's session, we have two items. The first one, which is on the agenda, and probably you have in front of yourself, regards the situation of Palestine. And then, after deliberating that agenda item, we will have a short break, and then by reconvening the meeting, we will discussing the cyberspace and international law, the item proposed by China. We got to adjourn the meeting at 12 o'clock because we've been invited, all of you invited by the mayor of Tehran to visit the Milad Tower, and we will be having our lunch in that place. This is our program for today in the morning. So the item will be deliberating and discussing is the deportation of Palestinians and other Israeli practices, among them the massive immigration and settlement of Jews in all occupied territories in violation of international law, particularly the Fourth Geneva Convention of 1949. May I ask the Secretary General to report on this agenda item. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Excellency, Mr. President. Honorable Mr. President, Ministers, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor to introduce you the topic, deportation of Palestinian and other Israeli practices, among them the massive immigration and settlement of Jews in all occupied territories in violation of international law, particularly the Fourth Geneva Convention of 1949. This issue was included in the agenda of the organization in the year 1988 upon the initiative of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Since that year, the Secretariat has closely monitored the legal developments pertaining to this issue. The long history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the inability to resolve it peacefully, in spite of the numerous bilateral and multilateral attempts, may imply that this conflict is vicious, stubborn, and seems to be resistant to such efforts. This conflict has lasted over 100 years and has turned out to be one of the longest and most violent of conflicts in the world. It has gone through various stages and developments during this 100 years, and still it remains unresolved and intractable. Precisely 47 years have elapsed since Israel first illegally occupied the Palestinian territories in 1967. The renewed vigor with which Israel is targeting Palestinian civilians, especially women and children, cannot be justified on any count. With their economic suffocated by the illegal Israeli blockade, Palestinians in Gaza suffered from massive unemployment, lack of access to essential resources and commodities that makes life possible. This, we must remember, is in tandem with the ongoing Israeli attacks from air, land, and sea. Economic strangulation is as deadly for Gaza as the renewed Israeli bombings. However, despite all legal efforts exerted by the international community to persuade Israel to stop its illegal expansionist settlement activities and declare Palestine as an independent state, occupation continues till date, without an early solution in sight. The people of Gaza, as some describe, is now living in the world's largest open jail. The last round of escalation of violence, which we witnessed a few months ago, what is termed as the Gaza War, is the third since 2008. Termed as Operation Protective Edge by Israel, an escalation of violence followed the abduction and killing of 3 Israeli youth by unidentified persons, and the retaliatory measures taken by Israel rolled into yet another period of escalated violence and devastation, which has left more than 2,200 people dead, caused widespread destruction in the densely populated coastal territory, including destruction of its power plant, hospitals, infrastructure, and even UN schools that house Palestinian civilian victims of violence. Needless to say that this physical devastation has resulted in profound human suffering. According to the United Nations estimates, 70% of those killed in this conflict were civilians. These events, which unfolded in the region over a period of 50 days, have shocked the conscience of the world and left all of us numb. Subsequently, the UN has constituted an international commission of inquiry into possible human rights violation and war crimes committed during Israeli military offensive in the Gaza Strip. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the illegal military occupation of Palestinian territories and the human rights abuses perpetrated on the people of Palestine has now been continuing for more than 4 decades. Despite international consensus expressed through the binding resolution of the Security Council and the General Assembly of the UN, the occupying power continues to defy international law and the will of the international community. Even as the latest ceasefire has been announced, the occupying power is continuing with its expansionist policies. Time and again, the international community has asserted the application of the Fourth Geneva Convention relative to the protection of civilian persons in the time of war to this conflict. The illegal annexation of Palestinian land, the creation of Jewish colonial settlement, and the massive deportation of Palestinians are all actions in violation of international humanitarian law and human rights law. The denial of water and other essential services to Palestinians and the continuing blockade of Gaza that prevents the Palestinians from exercising their right to seek refuge on other territories are acts in the nature of collective punishment imposed on the people of Palestine in violation of the Geneva Conventions and customary international humanitarian laws. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, 10 years have now elapsed since the historic judgment of the International Court of Justice, where the court reaffirmed the illegal nature of these practices, and in particular the construction and maintenance of the wall that separates isolates a group of Palestinians. Unfortunately, the judgment appears to have fallen on deaf ears, and every single activity that the court described as illegal has been continuing unaffected. We, the members of the international community, must reflect on how such blatant disregard for the views of a prominent institution that supports the international order strikes at the roots of an international society that we seek to build based on the foundation of rule of law, justice, and equity. As the numerous reports that were discussed in the ALCO Secretariat document before you demonstrate, the continuing occupation of Palestinian land and the blockade of Gaza lies at the root of all human rights violations faced by the Palestinian peoples. An occupation regime that refuses to earnestly contribute to effort to reach a peaceful solution should be considered as an illegal one. The occupant has a duty under international law to conduct negotiation in good faith for a peaceful solution. it would seem that an occupant who proposes unreasonable condition or otherwise obstruct negotiation for peace for the purpose of retaining control over the occupied territory could be considered a violator of international law. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the situation in Palestine is grave, and the principal tool to redress this is ensuring compliance with international law. ALCO has time and again asserted the illegal nature of Israeli practices in the occupied Palestinian territories and called for the resolution of the conflict in accordance with the principle of international law, including the provision and principle of the Charter of the UN, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the regulation annexed to the Hague Convention of 1907, and the Geneva Convention, in particular the Fourth Geneva Convention, regarding the protection of civilian persons in time of war. It is also relevant here to recall the widely supported UN Security Council and UN General Assembly Resolution 242, 338, and 1515, which affirm the legal obligation of Israel to withdraw from Palestinian territories obtained in the year 1967. Israel is obliged to respect and be bound by the relevant principle of international law contained in the Fourth Geneva Convention relative to the protection of civilian persons in time of war, 12 August 1949. In particular, those provisions of the convention that require an occupying power to protect the status quo, human rights, and prospect for self-determination of the occupied people. Since 1967, Israel has refused to accept this framework of legal obligations. Not only has Israel failed to withdraw from the occupied territories, it has in fact created heavily armed settlement, bypass roads, and security zones in the midst of a future Palestinian state that seriously compromises the basic human rights of the Palestinian people, including the right of self-determination. The issue concerning the statehood of Palestine has been debated by the various United Nations organs since 1947. However, no amicable solution of the issue had been found yet. The legal status of Palestine, both the UN and as an independent state, recognized as such by other members of the international community, is a vexed question that has evoked different reaction from both the groups of states that has aligned in favor and not in favor of Palestine statehood. The recognition of Palestine as a full member of the UN and as an independent state throws up several issues in international law. Until all the rights accorded to the Palestinian people by virtue of the principle enshrined in international law are respected by Israel, the Palestinian right of resistance to the occupation, established by a consensus within the UN, would continue. The UN consensus is particularly persuasive because the Palestinian right of self-determination is recognized by a majority of states, and the UN has made clear the legal rights and duties of Israeli-Palestinian conflict in a series of widely supported resolutions, as well as in the roadmap and Arab Peace Initiative. ALCO, as the only intergovernmental legal organization in the Asian and African region, would continue to reiterate the urgent need on the part of the international community to seriously address all of the above-mentioned grave violations and severe breaches of international law, including international humanitarian law, being committed by the occupying power against the Palestinian people. In the resolution adopted at the successive annual sessions, ALCO has demanded that occupying power Israel comply fully with the provision and principle of the Charter of the UN, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the regulation annexed to the Hague Convention of 1907, and the Geneva Convention, in particular the Fourth Geneva Convention, relative to the protection of civilian persons in time of war of August 1949, in order to protect the rights of Palestine. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, with this introductory remark, let me draw the framework for the deliberation which will follow. The deliberation may focus on the violation of international law, particularly international human rights law, the humanitarian law committed by the government of Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory, special focus on the renewed military excesses in the occupied Palestinian territories with reference to the Fourth Geneva Convention and UN Security Council and General Assembly resolution, war crimes committed in Gaza by the Israeli forces, including blockade of Gaza, the role of international community to pressurize Israel to comply with its international obligation, the role of ICC in ensuring that the parties to the conflict maintain respect for international humanitarian law, and the need for establishing an independent sovereign state of Palestine as a prelude to establishing peace in the Middle East. Thank you for your patient hearing.
I thank the Secretary General for his very informative and useful report. The floor is open. The list of the speakers I'm having includes India, Japan, and Iran, and Pakistan, and Syria, and Palestine. India has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning to all. We thank the Secretary General for his comprehensive report on the topic under discussion. We express our deep concern at the loss of large number of civilian lives in Gaza. We welcome the long-term ceasefire, which should bring stability and security to the region and its people. Mr. President, India has joined the international call for an end to Israeli settlements in the occupied Palestine territories and for an early and significant easing of restrictions on the free movement of persons and goods within Palestine. India has also played a proactive role in generating support for the Palestinian cause in multilateral fora. We supported Palestine's bid for full and equal membership of the United Nations in 2011. We also co-sponsored the United Nations General Assembly resolution in November 2012 that upgraded the status of Palestine to a non-member observer state. Apart from strong political support to the Palestinian cause at international, regional, and bilateral levels, India has been contributing economic and developmental assistance to the Palestinian people. India has committed to assist Palestine in the fields of information and technology, vocational training, and building of schools. We are also implementing a series of development projects under the ISBA Fund in Palestine. Additionally, India contributes US $1 million annually to UNRWA, primarily for provision of food and medicines to displaced Palestinian people in refugee camps. Mr. President, India supports a comprehensive resolution of the Palestinian issue, leading to a sovereign, independent, viable, and united state of Palestine living within secure and recognized borders, side by side at peace with Israel, as endorsed in the Quartet Roadmap and relevant United Nations Security Council resolutions. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Japan has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, my delegation wishes to state Japan's firm basic stand, that is, Japan supports a two-state solution whereby Israel and the future independent Palestine state live side by side in peace and security. Japan urges both Israel and the Palestinian Authority to exert further efforts to build mutual trust and to advance the direct negotiations in order to realize the two-state solution at the earliest possible date. Japan also wishes to emphasize that the conflict between Israeli and Palestinian sides should be resolved only through negotiations based on the relevant UN Security Council resolutions, the Madrid Principles, the roadmap, the agreements previously reached by the parties and the Arab Peace Initiative, and that any violent act must be firmly rejected. 5 months have passed since the peace negotiations were suspended last April Japan is concerned that the momentum of resuming the negotiations is declining. Japan believes that peace through a two-state solution will be realized only by serious negotiations between Israel and Palestine. Japan urges both sides to resume negotiations as soon and to refrain from any unilateral actions that might hinder direct negotiations. Mr. President, with regard to the question in the Gaza Strip, Japan has been seriously concerned about the situation there. Japan decided to extend an emergency assistance of $5.5 million in July. Japan has been making various diplomatic efforts, such as the teleconference between Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu, and the visit of Deputy Foreign Minister Nobuo Kishi to Egypt, Israel, Palestine, and Jordan. Through such efforts, Japan has been urging the parties concerned to swiftly realize a lasting ceasefire. Japan will continue to make such efforts in coordination with the international community. Upon the announcement of the recent ceasefire agreement between Israeli and Palestinian militants, the Foreign Minister of Japan issued a statement welcoming the ceasefire agreement between both parties and also expressing respect for the mediation efforts by Egypt, and reiterated the following proposal by the Japanese government to the international community so that the ceasefire agreement would lead to a lasting ceasefire and stabilization of the Gaza Strip. 1. The lasting ceasefire should be achieved on the basis of relevant past agreements, including the ceasefire agreement proposed by Egypt in 2012, Palestine National Reconciliation Agreement proposed by Egypt in 2009, Chapter 2 of the Israeli-Palestinian Interim Agreement on the West Bank and the Gaza Strip in 1995. 2. All parties concerned should discuss their concrete steps without any preconditions. 3. The ceasefire should lead to the resumption of the Middle East peace talks and the stabilization of the entire Middle East. 4. And last, the international community should render its support to the stabilization of Gaza and its people after lasting ceasefire is achieved. The Japanese government will continue to play an active role based on the above-mentioned proposal and for the stabilization of the Gaza Strip and the entire Middle East. Our support should not only be confined to temporary aid, but should also reach out to long-standing seamless efforts ranging from emergency humanitarian aid to reconstruction. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Iran has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Mr. President, I thank Secretary General for his informative introductory statement. I would also like to express my appreciation to the Secretariat for the worthy consideration of the topic on Palestinian, which continues to deserve particular attention by ALCO member states. Mr. President, the world has witnessed the blatant disregard for fundamental human rights of the Palestinian people for more than 60 years. Few calls made by international bodies in this regard have been sadly hindered and blocked by double standards imposed by some countries. The denial of the inalienable right of the Palestinian people to self-determination, which deprived them of the most basic necessities of life by Zionist regime, emits silence of the international community has almost paralyzed the legal arsenal in this regard. In recent months, brazen commission of war crimes and crimes against humanity against the residents of Gaza has shocked the conscience of humanity, directing indiscriminate attacks against thousands of innocent people, bringing about the death of more than 2,000 civilians and injury of some 10,000, many of them women and children, coupled with the replacement of 400,000 people and the destruction of 9,000 homes through the widespread and systematic attack, all occurred in 50 days. The said atrocities, along with the expansionist policies of the Israeli regime in the West Bank and the isolation of Palestinians in an enclave for several days, is flagrant violation of international humanitarian law and human rights law, cannot escape justice. The Islamic Republic of Iran is of the view that persistent impunity risks moving against the long-awaited goal of achieving a lasting peace in the Middle East. Mr. President, the advisory opinion delivered by the International Court of Justice in the case concerning the legal consequences of the construction of a wall in the occupied Palestinian territory described the construction of the wall in the occupied Palestinian territory, including in and around Jerusalem and its associated regime, quote, contrarily to international law, unquote. ICJ's opinion must be endorsed by the international community in that the existence of a Palestinian people is no longer an issue and they do have a right to self-determination. Also, numerous calls made by the Human Rights Council regarding gross violations of international human rights law and grave breaches of international humanitarian law during the Israeli occupation and military operations in Gaza are evidence thereof. Thus, the Islamic Republic of Iran calls for the formal recognition of the right of the Palestinians to self-determination and full respect for principles of international law, including the provisions and principles of the Charter of the United Nations, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the regulations annexed to the Hague Convention of 1907 and the Geneva Conventions, in particular the Fourth Geneva Convention regarding the protection of civilian persons in time of war. I would like to end my remarks by emphasizing the necessity of bringing into play all the existing legal arsenal to bring to justice the perpetrators of most serious crimes of grave concern to the international community, especially by engaging the International Criminal Court in order to put an end to impunity of those responsible for the crimes committed against the residents of Gaza. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. And the next speaker on the list is Pakistan. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. Expressing utter respect to the observations of the worthy Secretary General, I would try my best to confine my observations to the topic and its related matters only. At the outset, I express my gratitude to the Honorable Secretary General for very elaborative statement and introduction on the topic, on the item, sorry. Mr. President, the item itself indicates two important parts. The first part is that it relates to the Fourth Geneva Convention. Fourth Geneva Convention, there are two chapters which are related